Thank you all again for coming today and joining us for today's webinar. My name is Alex Collins. I'm the Professional Development Manager here at AASHL. And today we're going to be discussing some ways you can engage with your local community in a virtual space as we all adapt to these ever-changing times. And I'd like to thank Andrew and Yeet and Nick from TimeLooper for joining us today to offer some resources and their expertise on how we can make the most of this virtual space. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Andrew to get our presentation started today.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody across the country. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thanks for taking the time to meet with us in these uncertain days. Sure that everybody has a lot going on. A couple of other housekeeping notes that I would like to add. As we move through this presentation, there will certainly be a series of links that I click to or tools that we reference. I would encourage you to not worry about taking notes on each of these different products or tools that we're going to speak about today, because they will all be available with embedded links, both within AASLH's website within the next couple of days and on TimeLooper's website as of the end of day today, hopefully. And therefore, we would really just encourage you to focus on the presentation as you see it. Also, we have designed the amount of content to fit within an hour. We expect the amount of content to run about 40 minutes. The implication of that is, and we have an hour, the implication of that is that as you ask questions, we will do our best to answer them when they are asked, so then that way they are as relevant as possible to the topic at hand. However, if the number of questions, given the number of participants that are here, become too voluminous, we will have to punt some of those towards the back end. And Yeet and and Nick and I are all willing to stay on as long as required to answer everybody's question. But we do want to ensure that we get through the prescribed content within the hour to be respectful of everybody's time. So without further ado, we are now going to jump right in. The topic of today's webinar is Museum Closed Open for Impact. And we developed this webinar because we have received numerous inquiries from people and institutions who we've gotten to know in the last 6 years about how these institutions, such as yours, can quickly develop virtual reality tours that allow people access to your institution. People around the country are social distancing. Many are stuck at home on government orders, and they're looking for meaningful activities to undertake. And in that environment, institutions such as yours that are used to educating and engaging your community, your public, your stakeholders have had to physically close your doors. And for many of you, you've been thinking about virtual reality, and some of you have even deployed it. Others of you have thought about it, but frankly have never gotten around to it because you've always had another priority to tackle. And still yet, there's a third category of you who never thought that you would be in this situation. Those of you who really value face-to-face interaction and don't want to do anything to take away from that. You never imagined that you would be in a world where you're forced to wrestle with distance-based engagement. And so for all of you, we are now here today to talk about how, in a matter of days, in as few as 24 hours or maybe as long as a week, you can develop a meaningful digital distance-based experience for your users that enhance your objectives and their objectives. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what those objectives may be. But before we dive in too deeply and begin to talk about some of the more nuanced content production strategies that you might want to deploy, we first wanted to start by level setting definitionally on what virtual reality is. There are so many different perspectives out there on this topic, as you can imagine, but what we wanted to do was talk about our definition for the sake of this conversation today. So we're going to take a very few brief minutes to sort of level set on what VR is, and then from there we'll go into how you can create it. So really, VR is about taking people out of their present environment and giving them an other sense of place. If I'm at home and you want to take me to my local museum, or you want to take me around the world to a historic site, you can do that by creating these immersive 360-degree environments that people can then experience, and they will feel like they are no longer in their current environment and they are completely immersed someplace else. Now, that sense of immersion can occur in two principal ways. The first way is when you're talking about the world as it looks today. If you want to take people to an existing historic site and show them exactly how it looks, you really need to take a 360-degree camera and capture either a photo or video of it, and then place people inside of that environment. There's really not much else you have to do. You can also, if you have more advanced capabilities and perhaps a bit more time, you could take a three-dimensional scan of that environment. But if you want to show people a time that no longer exists, if you want to take people back to the Cretaceous period, or if you want to take people, back to 1789 or to 1863 or 1918 or 1943, you have to recreate that environment because it no longer exists. Or if you want to show people the potential impact of events in the future, such as climate change and how that might impact the environment in the future. There are advanced statistical 3D models, but you would need to actually model out what that looks like in terms of changing shorelines and sea rise levels, et cetera. And so to do all of that, you would need to rely on computer generated imagery. It's not that photo, video scans of the present day environment or better or worse than CGI. It's just that they have very different use cases. And so before we move further into this presentation, I'm going to actually pass it over to my colleague Yeet, who's going to walk you through a couple of visual examples of these principal forms of virtual immersion. So that way, for those of you who've never experienced either of these tools, we'll all level set and definitionally be on the same plane. So Yeet, I'm now going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, but before that, can I ask a question? Is this what everybody is seeing? The museum closed the template?
Yeah, you have to. I don't know where.
Because we couldn't see your slide either. I don't know
Oh,
if
you
this
couldn't
is
see
part
my
of.
slide either?
No.
Okay. So Alex, nobody could see my slides. I don't know why.
Right. So in the meantime, maybe you guys can chat and I can show the example.
Perfect.
Right? Okay. So I'm going to show you how this experience works, but I'm connecting today from my iPad. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what I see. But very quickly, a 360-degree content means all the content is all around you. And then when you move your phone, you see the view or the content. So you have the control by which direction you are looking at. So now I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everybody see the view?
Yes, we're good. It was my error. You're good.
All right. So this is the view from the top of Washington Monument. It is 360 degrees static image, and it's present day. So this project was created for National Park Service at National Mall. Washington Monument was closed for a period of time, and they want to show the view from the top. And then this is what we created for them. And then when people visit the mall, they see the sign, they download the app, and then they see the view from the top, and also they can see it from anywhere around the world. The next example that I'm going to show you is inside the same content. So their interpretive content is the history of Washington Monument from the top of the monument. And then we created a computer-generated content to visualize the change in landscape. And with a transition, we went back in time. And now everything that you see here is computer-generated. But still, it's a 360 degrees image.
Thank you, Yeet. All right. Now, can you see my screen, Yeet?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it's important to consider the use case for virtual reality. Obviously, the goal in part is to visually immerse people inside of these environments, but it's worth pausing for a second to consider the question of why, so what? At the end of the day, one of the famous VR content producers out there has said that virtual reality is an empathy machine because of the deep level of immersion that it provides to people when they're able to fully experience a full 360-degree view. It not only enables visualization, but it really heightens people's sense of context and also enables them to have enhanced meaning. And part of the way that you drive that enhanced meaning is through the way that you're going to interpret those environments. And we're going to show you a few tools that you can utilize to move just beyond 360-degree photos. But it's really important to take home the message that VR is not just a photo. It's not just a website that people can experience. It's a fully emotional experience, right? It moves beyond the didactic, and it really allows people to have that, oh, wow, moment. And so with that, it's also important to realize that that level of immersion and that experience doesn't even require a high-end headset. It would be wonderful if everybody at home had a $200 Oculus Go headset, which is one of the best headsets on the market at a very modest price point, but people don't. But most Americans sitting at home today do have a smart device, whether it's an iPhone, an Android, a tablet. Those devices are sufficient to create this level of immersion and to allow people to experience 360-degree environments, photo, video, or CGI. In a perfect world, yes, everybody has these devices, but we are not in a perfect world, right? Our worlds have changed overnight. In many cases, they are changing today. If you live in Florida, yes, this morning you could move freely about. And as of today, you're now being encouraged to shelter in place at home. The impact of that is that we need to sort of take the world where it is and take advantage of the fact that people around the country already have access to these devices, which means that from a scalability and a penetration perspective, you're able to get content out far, wide, and put it into the hands of your users in a very meaningful way without even asking them to do anything other than engage in the devices that they already utilize on a daily basis. So how then do we take these 360-degree photos and computer-generated imagery and enhance the level of, how do we enable you to produce them? Well, it's very simple. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk briefly about steps that you can take to produce all of this content in a very quick and cost-effective way. We're actually going to first start by talking about equipment. So you cannot use your smart, there's a question here. I understand a lot of institutions are interested in providing access to visitors. What data do you have to suggest that visitors are actually interested in using virtual tours, yours or by others? For instance, I love the Washington Monument example, how many people use it? So that's a great question. And the answer to that question really depends on how this content gets deployed. And what we mean by deployed is what is the customer journey? And many of the learnings that I'm gonna quickly highlight for you kind of get thrown out the window in this kind of environment. But for example, if you're a historic site or a museum, are you asking people to download an app onto your phone? Are you handing out devices to individuals as they walk into your institution? Or are you renting these devices? Or do you have a separate VR movie theater where people are putting on headsets and fully immersing themselves without having to mess around with a handheld device at all? Within these institutions, we see penetration rates of 15 to 20% when it's really easy for the user. So 15 to 20% of all people who walk into the institution are opting up to this kind of experience. At the National Mall, they get 30 million people who come across the mall every year. But of those 30 million people who come across the mall, 10 million of them come to the Washington Monument. We see about 10,000 users a month downloading this content based on the one wayfinding signage that we see at the base of the Washington Monument every month. But that is wholly different from what you're going to be doing, which is engaging in facilitating content dissemination and distribution at home. So the way that I would encourage you to think about it is, and we're going to get into this later, but how do you think about the use case? Is the use case K-12 education? How many school groups do you have coming in the months of April and May? And does the content align to that interpretive journey? If it does align to that interpretive journey, create the content and then engage the teacher and the schools that otherwise would be coming on site, and then drive them to download the content for home-based use. So it really depends upon the context, and it really depends upon the strength of your channels with regards to how many people are going to access and download this content at home. So with that, moving on to how you produce this content, let me start by saying that all of this consumer grade equipment is relatively modestly priced and more than does the trick. Whether you have a historic site that's outdoors, or it's an indoor historic site, or a museum, these cameras more than fit the bill. So the Insta360 1X, the Ricoh Theta 5, and the Garmin Verb 360 range in price from $199 to $700. All you will have to do when you buy this camera is download the app for each of these devices onto your smartphone, and then your smartphone will serve as like your console to point and click or point and record these 360-degree photos. And then these three pieces of software have auto stitching, and then you have the immersive content that you need. It's really that simple. All you need to do is buy the camera, put it on a tripod at the point of interest, and then take the photo. From there, you then have to upload or distribute that piece of content. So we're going to show you a couple of different examples of content that get deployed on free publication platforms. So YouTube 360, Facebook, Vimeo, these are all great free platforms that you can use to upload your photos same day. Take your photo, it runs through the auto stitching software, and then you upload it to YouTube 360 or Facebook, and you can engage your community immediately. So to give you an example of what these different kind of immersive mediums look like on these shared platforms, I'm going to actually start by showing you this example from the Guggenheim. So if you look at the Guggenheim here, these 360-degree photos were taken by a basic camera, much like one of the ones that I've recommended. And then you can simply drag and move your mouse around the screen. So the only hardware that you need here is a computer, whether it's a smartphone or a desktop. And then they have stitched multiple 360-degree photos together by allowing you to click on the X and teleporting yourself to other parts within the institution. So these are not 360-degree, these are not full scans of the institution where you can continuously move. These are just multiple 360-degree photos that allow people to move throughout the institution. So again, this is the kind of content that you can take with a basic off-the-shelf camera and upload to Google's website same day. If you want to enhance the level of immersion, and there's a question that has just come in. We'll get to that in a second. If you want to enhance the level of immersion, then one of the things that you can do is create 360-degree videos instead of 360-degree photos. So this is an example from Thomas Edison's National Historic Site, where instead you could put an interpreter in the foreground and then have them speak to what it is that you're seeing and interacting with inside of the environment.
Welcome to Thomas Edison National Historical Park. I'm glad you can join me here in Edison's library, or some refer to it as his office. He spent a lot of time here in West Orange, arrived here in 1887, spent the rest of his life till he passed away in 1931. He did a lot of work here at his desk, and as you take a look at it, you can see it's a lot of papers, a lot of books. His library had over 10,000 volumes, over 3 stories.
So for those of you, so for our historic site partners, these are really great because they really allow you to leverage the interpreter and the historians within your institution. A couple of questions that we have, one of which is, our organization prides itself on being very traditional. Our visitor services branch is a small outlier in a legislative organization, and we don't have our own socials or online spaces. What are some key points that can be brought to our higher ups to allow us to produce this type of content? So I'm not sure that I understand the question. Yi, do you understand that question? We don't have our own socials, online spaces. Oh, so how can you distribute this content? Do you think that's what this question means?
Maybe it is like a Snapchat. There's this historic asset, and then you see it on your head, kind of thing, maybe.
I'm not sure. Kelsey, if you could expand on that, we'll get back to it. The next question is there a software that allows your head to be placed on vintage clothing or placed?
Sorry, I was responding to that one. Sorry. For the first one, maybe it's like, how can we buy in the higher ups to approve this kind of a content? I guess like demonstration is key, them trying. And also currently, whoever the service provider is, showing examples from those institutions. For example, we have National Park Service content. Is that the one that you really love? Or the other one is Pearl Harbor example. So if they can see what other institutions are doing and how they are using it, also that's another way of convincing them, because you're not necessarily really bringing innovative, cutting edge technology that being used in entertainment to your cultural institution. It is you're bringing a cultural product that's being used by others already and then trying to bring that to your institution.
And I think also, Kelsey, that it's a matter of alternatives, right? So in this environment, I think you really have more leverage than you previously have, where you can push back and say, what's the alternative? People need content and they need access to our institution, and absent this, there isn't a great immersive way to do it. So that's what we would recommend. In terms of filters for overlying vintage clothing on from a different era, I don't know of any filters for 360-degree video that have been produced. We will get to 360-degree photo in a second. But for 360-degree video, I don't know of any. Do you know of any?
Not in video format.
Not in video.
That you can use yourself, but they are AR products, like where it's like a makeup you put at the head.
Exactly. But we haven't found any that would probably be relevant for this use case. So again, these cameras range from $299 to $700. The publication platforms are absolutely free, and then you're off to the races. So with regards to thinking about how you might want to think about the development of VR, for those of you who are unfamiliar with how to translate your existing physical space into a virtual environment, we would really encourage you to think about the context and meaning for your environment, right? So if you are a public space, if you are a steward of a public space where people, come to and fro, you should really think about, are people coming to explore the environment? Why are people coming? Do they want to get a sense of key events that occurred, on that battlefield, for example? And are they interested in the placement of key persons or infrastructure? What is it that drives people to your historic public land? If you're a historic building, maybe it's more about allowing people to explore the view, to get up close and personal with historic artifacts, to understand key moments that happened within your institution, and then thinking about how the physical environment interacts with the interpretation that you tend to deliver. And then probably where you're really going to have to focus is on thinking about how to communicate the interpretive element with the obvious visual element that the 360-degree photo environment already provides. And then for museums, of course, it's also about getting behind the casings and exploring artifacts. So one of the other things that you can do, whether you're a historic building or a museum, if you have historic artifacts that people frequently would like to be able to get up close and personal to, but you can't allow them, is you can take many photos of these actual artifacts from different angles and then upload them to free software programs and create AR, augmented reality models using a technique called photogrammetry. So basically what happens is you'll take 30, 40, 50 photos of Paul Bunyan's axe, and then those photos all get uploaded to a photogrammetry software platform, and then you'll have a 3D model of that axe. You could then take the photo of the 3D model of that axe and then put it into the foreground of your VR environment, for example. But regardless of what kind of space you have as a historic or a historical institution, we would encourage you to think about the programming that you deliver on site and then think about how that can be scaled and ported into these virtual environments. You already have so much going on at your institution that now probably isn't the best time to think about how to develop something from whole cloth. You should probably start from your place of strength and look at your existing interpretive content and then think about how to deploy that rather than, starting from scratch. So once you've figured out what those interpretive components are that you really want to focus on, and once you think about how you want to, what those pieces are that you want to interact with the physical environment, the meaning, the lessons, there are a couple of different ways in which you can do that. So now what we want to do is walk you through how you can add interpretation to these 360-degree environments. So if it's a 360-degree photo, allowing people to interact with the environment to learn about the environment's relation to these important concepts, primary source materials, et cetera, et cetera. If it is a 360-degree video, looking at thinking about how you can show a physical environment that doesn't exist through computer-generated imagery. Utilizing these kind of interpretive methods and interactive skills will really allow your user to get a lot more out of the experience and to stay much more engaged. So now I'm actually going to pass it back to Yeet, where he's going to walk you through a couple of different examples of how to enhance interactivity. So let me...
So the first two examples are from two different locations, two different type of parks. From two different parks. And then those will show, those are two examples as an enhancement of a regular 260 image. Oh, it's keep dropping, sorry. Okay, so the first one is from East Bay Regional Parks. We sent them our 360 camera. This is about 2 years ago, and then they took this 360 picture. But as you can imagine, you need the context, you need the interpretation to give a meaning to what the audience is looking at. And then this is what we did for them.
Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park's open space protects land that is vital for the plants and animals who make a home on these hillsides. Bountiful wildflowers.
As urban areas around regional parks expand, plants and animals seek out new habitats. Urban oak trees and local parks provide opportunities for wildlife to create.
As you can see, you can overlay information so that to make the image more meaningful, more interpretive, more educational. So this was an outdoor example. Now, let me give you an example from a historic house. And this is Peterson House at Ford's Theater. This is where Abraham Lincoln died. And so you can imagine this could be like a regular museum with exhibition or a historic house. And then you can tag this information to inside this space and then provide more information. In this case, in this particular example, there's also storytelling. So this is where Lincoln died, and then we know who were in that room on that day. So when you select these portraits, and then we know exactly who were in which room, who was in which room. So you're gonna listen from them what they have seen on that day.
I inquired where Miss Lincoln was and was informed that she was in the front parlor. I entered the parlor and found her there entirely alone. She was standing by a marble-top table in the center of the...
After the president died, Dr. Gurley went to Mrs. Lincoln and told her, "The president is dead." "Oh, why did you not let me know?"
"Why did you not come to me last night, Elizabeth? I sent for you," Mrs. Lincoln asked in a low whisper. All
right. So these are two examples of how to enhance, how to make more interpretive your plain 360 content. Now let me show you a more sophisticated, more complicated storytelling from New York City, Federal Hall. So Federal Hall is right next to New York Stock Exchange, and that's where George Washington was inaugurated. So in this case, we combine a couple of different techniques from computer-generated content to real actors to storytelling with a voiceover. Let's see what it looks like.
It has been such an exciting spring. Our new nation's first electoral college has selected Revolutionary War General George Washington to be its first president. Rumor and notice of our war hero's pending arrival to New York City, now our nation's capital, has created a sense of festivity.
Thank you, Yeet. So there are a couple of questions. Going back to the previous slide, one of which is, can you give us example of free photogrammetry resources out there? So I don't necessarily know, a lot of them are freemium, so to speak. So like Photosmith is totally free, but I don't know if it's any good. 3DF Zephyr and Autodesk are two of the leading ones out there in the market. I know 3DF Zephyr, which really is one of the best ones, starts for free, and then software licensing, you know, can go up from there to a couple $1,000s. So it really depends upon what your needs are. And each of these different companies offer different freemium models, so to speak. So you'll just have to sort of track it down. If you like, go on to Wikipedia or Google and just look for photogrammetry software providers, there's literally hundreds of them out there. One other question that we got from Jennifer, which is a great question, is there a way to embed historical photos into a 360 so that a visitor can see the room as historical and then as modern? And the answer to that is absolutely, Jennifer, absolutely. What Yeet just showed you from Ford's Theater is exactly the way that you would do it. But rather than putting a portrait of an individual at that point of view, you would overlay the photo from the exact perspective. You could either embed it in that environment, or you could do like we showed and trigger that environment. So that way the individual could easily sort of toggle between before and after. And so there are different publication platforms that you can use to facilitate that kind of interactivity. There's Virtual Tour Creator, and then there's also Pano2 VR. You know, we really like Pano2 VR as the sort of off-the-shelf platform. Pano2 VR is pretty user-friendly, and the software license for that is from about $149. Or it's the kind of thing that TimeLooper can do for you. We're offering all of our services absolutely free. So we would be more than happy to create and host all of these experiences if you don't want to go through the trouble of creating this content yourself. We'll get into that a little bit more later on, but in terms of non-TimeLooper products, I would probably recommend Pano2 VR. So Jennifer asked about embedding, you know, photos, you know, black and white photos or color photos over the 360-degree environment to get a sense of the before and after. One of the things that we want to now talk about is the way that you would think about doing that, right? So I had highlighted this before, but I just really want to stress again that you already have the content, and I would encourage you to not reinvent the wheel. What we mean by that is oftentimes you all have the luxury of time in developing interpretive journeys. In this particular instance, you have people that are stuck at home and your doors are closed. Whether your doors are going to be closed for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or 12 weeks is relatively unclear, could be longer. But what we would encourage you to do is to move as quickly as possible. And the way that you do that is by exploiting all of the interpretive efforts that you've already undertaken. So this is an example from the Henry Ford in Michigan. They have a museum scavenger hunt. What you could do is take that scavenger hunt and deconstruct it into various elements that you might find in different rooms within your historic site or in your museum, and then utilize the interactive feature that we just showcased to create a virtual scavenger hunt, right? That's just one example. But the point is, start from your interpretive programming. One of the other reasons why you should start from your interpretive programming is not just because it will be easier to port to a VR environment, but because you typically have known constituencies that value your different programming. So one way to think about it would be to start from the end. Who are the end consumers that you're trying to meet needs for? How quickly do they need those? How quickly do they need those needs met? And then prioritize that content development first. So for example, if in the months of April and May, you typically get 50,000 school students coming through your museum or your historic site, and they're there to study part of your permanent collection, because every year 8th graders study the end of World War II, and you've got this great World War II exhibit, that might be a good place to start, because those students are at home now and they're not able to take virtual field trips. So if you can get something up in the next couple of weeks and push it out to all of those educational institutions who would otherwise be coming, you already have a ready-made user base that will value and want to produce this content, utilize this content quickly. So then from there, oftentimes geography is destiny, right? And what we mean by that is geographic proximity is very much part of the story. There's no better use case for this, typically than like on a Civil War battlefield, where you go to that battlefield today and all you see are, farmland. And it's difficult for people to really understand who was where, when, and how geography impacted the storyline. And one of the challenges of 360-degree storytelling is that individual experiences are isolating from other individual 360-degree experiences. So you don't get, that relational perspective of the high ground and the low ground, to carry through this example. So one of the things that we've done is we've developed what we call this virtual map, where you can take all of your individual experiences and then put them onto an augmented reality map that anybody who's at home can walk through with their tablet device or their smartphone. And then as they literally are walking through their living room and across your terrain, again, whether it's a museum or a historic site, then as they walk onto those key points within your map, it would then trigger each of those individual experiences. So if you're at Gettysburg, you're going to walk and then you're going to get to Seminary Ridge. And then when you're standing on top of Seminary Ridge, it will activate a piece of content. Or you're then going to walk down into the orchard or up to Little Round Top. And then as you physically reach any of those individual points of interest within the virtual map, within the safety and comfort of your own home, you can then trigger each of those different individual experiences. If you're a museum and you don't necessarily think that it's directly relevant for people to walk along this map within your institution, think about the content journey that you're wishing to interpret. If you are a Holocaust museum, we could create a virtual map of Eastern Europe in 1944. And then as people are walking across that map, it triggers pieces of content that you've already developed within your institution, whether it's a traditional 2D video, or maybe you have 360-degree photo capture from key points in Europe. Each of those could trigger. So this is a bit conceptual. It's not necessarily easy to understand. So I'm going to pass it back to Yeet so he can show you what the user experience is like.
All right. So while I have the control, actually also I want to show an example for Jennifer in terms of overlaying picture on current environment, but not computer generated. That's an example from Beirut and Civil War. Here you can see the picture is present day, and then the photo is an historic photo that we overlay perfectly. So that's another way of using. And then imagine this being 360 degree, and then you have different angles, different pictures around you. All right, so now going back to the map. So in this example, I'm gonna first stop sharing and then just show you how it works from my camera. So you can see my phone. So it's again 360 degree. The difference is I can walk in this space and then go to different parts of the map. So now I'm going to do the same thing by sharing my screen so that you can have a better view. And this project was created for Japan Tourism Association. There's a historic city in Japan called Shimonoseki. and it has history that spreads around 2,000 years, and it's played a very important role in the history of Japan. And they want to tell those stories, and then different events took place in different neighborhoods, so they want people to explore them in a chronological order. So here's the experience.
Shimonoseki is a city with many stories to tell to her visitors. In some such stories, Shimonoseki played a supporting role. In others, she was the main actor, changing the course of history for the entirety of Japan. To hear her stories and witness her history unfold, start exploring by walking on the virtual map.
Thank you, Yeet. And these maps are incredibly easy for us to create. So, and again, we're doing all of this for free. So if this kind of integrated platform approach is something that you're interested in, it can literally get stood up within a day or two. It's very simple to create. But if you want to move beyond, so all of the content that we have described so far is what we would call on-demand content. People access it from whatever channel, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or the TimeLooper app, etc. And then they consume it themselves. But if what you really value is social interaction, you can also engage in VR conferencing on these virtual map platforms. So your head of interpretation, your head of education could be in the safety of their own home, and then their avatar would launch in these virtual environments, and then students all across the country or in one community could co-locate based on the number of participants that you determine that you want to have. And then you would facilitate a guided experiential tour, and you could have back and forth interaction like you would on a Zoom meeting, but inside of this map where people are also consuming this interpretive content. These experiences, these interactive VR conferences can also be recorded to further enhance your VR on-demand library over time. Next, we've been talking about a lot of this content, and so it's a question of what is it that you might want to consider prioritizing to get everything stood up quickly. So we would recommend VR 360-degree video because it's very easy to produce, and those 360-degree interactive pictures in the interactive map platform. All of those things, once you've defined that content journey and developed or provided assets, can all get stood up in a matter of days. Whereas the 360-degree movie might be even more immersive. You don't necessarily have the time for that. And the 360-degree photo might be the fastest thing to get stood up, like on Facebook, but it doesn't necessarily have sufficient interpretive value that people would find it meaningful. And then once you've created this content, it's not enough to say that if you build it, they will come, right? This isn't Field of Dreams. So you really have to think about how you're going to market and promote the availability of these digital resources to your community. If people come to your website to see if you're open or closed, you could have a big banner at the top that says, we're closed, but you can engage our community through digital tools that are on YouTube 360 or on our website that are embedded, or by the TimeLooper app, whatever it may be. Also, as I mentioned earlier today, you utilize all of the channels that you've developed over the years, all of your mailing lists, all of your public forums with your community of stakeholders, and push this content out to those communities to make them aware of it. This is half the battle. Half the battle is creating the content, and then the other half the battle is getting it, making it available to your community and known to your community. In terms of best practices, this is more of just a reiteration of everything that we've covered so far. So the one new piece is to find a partner who's committed to keeping their platform updated. For example, the National Park Service created an app for the National Mall, and then Apple pushed out a software update, and then within 3 months, this app wasn't working. Whether it's TimeLooper or Google, you don't want to have to worry about the technology. You should only be thinking about the interpretive content. So now's not the time to go testing some unproven platform. Utilize those platforms that are well established. Second, don't try to boil the ocean and replicate your entire museum online or your entire historic site and the extent of all of your interpretive programming. Start with a discrete need and create a discrete piece of series of content. Typically, we find 3 to 5 experiences is enough to be comprehensive for that piece, but don't try to rebuild your entire museum. And with that, keeping the specific pain points of your audience in mind are really useful. And of course, you don't need a headset. And then this is important. We find that our community of members are very understanding in these times. So if you're an institution where this is new and you're trying to dip your toe into the water, be brave. Everybody is being very understanding and they're going to appreciate your efforts. Start quickly, fail quickly, get the feedback of your community, and then iterate from there. But if you don't feel brave, if you don't feel like this is the kind of thing that you want to do, we're here to help. So what TimeLooper is doing specifically for the duration of COVID is everything that we do, we're offering completely for free for the extent of this COVID crisis, which means that we are happy to build map platforms. We're happy to deploy VR content inside of the TimeLooper app. We're happy to help you in anything that we can do to help you facilitate your relationship with your community at absolutely no cost. And we're doing it through a program that we're calling the TimeLooper Foundations program. So if you think that you really want to engage in virtual tours and open up your doors to your community, but you think, Google, Facebook, all of those different software programs that we highlighted before are a bit too much for you, come to us and we will happily do it for you at absolutely no cost for the duration of the COVID issue. So if your museum is going to be closed through September, then you now have a free opportunity to not worry about designing the content yourselves, having somebody else build it, testing it out with your community, seeing if they like it. And then from there, you can make a decision if moving forward, this is something that you want to continue to offer to your community, or if you would like to move back solely towards more traditional interpretation. Also, later, with regards to the resources, you're going to find all of these links on the TimeLooper PDF that we both send over to our friends at AASLH and also on the TimeLooper website. So you can download all of this yourself or get access to all of these links. And even if you start linking to Google, YouTube, and you don't really understand how to upload a 360 photo, but you think that's the way you want to go, shoot me an email and I'll be happy to help you troubleshoot all of this as you go along. And so with that, we got in 51 minutes with your questions, so pleased with that. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have, and there is one question. So once the tour has been developed and the COVID crisis is over, is there a monthly fee to keep the experience live? And the answer to that is yes. So depending upon the nature of the program that you develop, the monthly cost to continue to utilize TimeLooper software and platforms is $149 to $399 per month. And it depends upon the programs that you're deploying. Keep in mind that if it's the map platform that you want to develop, we're going to be creating a white label app that has your institution's branding and logos on it. So it looks and feels like an app that you're publishing, and only your institution's content will sit on that platform. If what you really want to do is just create some more basic 360-degree videos and interactive content, but that map platform isn't for you, then we're going to upload it onto the TimeLooper app. And then you would ask people to download that app rather than your own institutions. Next question. Is there a way to create these videos without going into our building, using existing photos, or do we need to go through the museum? So that's a good question, Christina. I think that for your institution, we do need 360-degree photo or video to be able to produce this content. If you can't actually get access into your building, there are a couple of different things that we can do. The first of which is, and we found that this has worked for some partners better than others, put out a call to action to your community to see if anybody's taken 360 photos. Admittedly, this tends to work better with open field historic sites than inside of museums, but you might be surprised at what members of your community have already created. Alternatively, we could think interpretively about the kind of content that you want to create from your museum and then deploy it within a map platform. So again, going back to that Holocaust example, we don't actually need to get into your museum in order to create a map-based platform, of World War II in Europe. What we would need to do though is to deploy content on that map platform. So talking about 2D videos from your photo archive, or other primary sources that you might have digital access to, those could be deployed on that platform. So another question from Dan is, when you say free to AASLH partners, does that mean AASLH institutional members? Yes. Anybody who's a member of AASLH, or frankly, even if you're a friend of an AASLH institutional partner, we're willing to help you so long as you're a museum, historic site, or cultural institution of those stripes. Everything is free. Come to us and we'll find a way to make it work. Next question, Yi, do you want to take this one? Can you talk more about how to do-it-yourself info points within a 360 photo? Maybe talk about strategically how to think about that.
Yeah. So when you, so let's say that it's a inside space, indoor space, like the one that I showed from Federal Hall, even outdoors. So a best practice is, first of all, making a prioritization, which content, which objects inside that space are the most important ones. And then try to limit the number of experiences per content, per picture, 5 to 7, because then otherwise it becomes too cluttered, too much. And then in each information, whether that's an audio, video, or text, also try to keep it short, and then try to take advantage of the physical environment, so that becomes, that overlay information is a complementer. The 360 picture and then the overlay image is completing each other. And also, let's say that you have one space and then you want to talk on different topics. So you can create as many versions of that. One may be talking about historic artifacts, the other one be talking about maybe the stories of the people who use that room. So you don't have to put everything inside the same space. There's no cost of adding a second or third one, and other than time and an effort. In terms of how you can create them, I can talk about how we do it, how our program works. So you take the 360 picture, or maybe you already have it, and then you send it, and then we upload it to our platform and then give access to you, and then you're just gonna draw circles on the picture. I want to highlight this here, 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 and then here are the content that comes, and then we uploaded a system, and it will forward to you to approve, and then it will go live. So that is simple.
If you want to do it yourself, what you would need to do is you would need to have a designer on your team design those interactive graphics that people will see, and then you upload your 360 photo to Pano2VR, and then you would put the pinpoints inside of that environment, and then drag those 3D, those visual images that your design team creates onto those interactive points. So one question that we actually got from the chat bar is, are you able to use 360 photos from Google Maps? Yes and no. If it is from Google Street View, we cannot take it. It is the property of Google, and we don't use Google APIs to integrate their maps in, and so we cannot take them offline. If you go to Google though, and go through Google Maps, you will find many, many, many 360-degree photos that individual people have taken and uploaded to Google Maps. You can do a little bit of sleuthing. Oftentimes it's not that difficult. Get in touch with those individuals and then ask them, especially given the times that we're in, if they are willing to allow you to have access to that actual content, and then they will send you the photo and then you can use it yourself. But in terms of just like ripping images out of Google Street View, that is against their terms of service. All right, Yeet, another question. Maybe you can answer this one. Would that content interpretation be written or spoken?
It can be both. It can even be video in certain instances. So what we did with East Bay Regional Parks, it is text, primarily text. So they send us the audio files, but in order to make it more accessible, we also turn them into text and then combine them with image. So best practice would be using both so that it also works for accessibility purposes.
Okay. Any other questions? We're happy to stay on. I know that we're coming up on the hour. We want to be respectful of your time. If you have other questions, if you do have other questions, you can always email us. We're happy to get on a phone call. Otherwise, I'm gonna now pass it back to our friends from AASLH. So thanks, everybody.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Yeet. That was a great presentation. I hope this has offered some inspiration to everyone on how you might be able to move some of your interpretive content online into a virtual space. Again, please reach out to that contact information. We have recorded this presentation. You will get a copy of the recording. So if you want to review any of this material or share it out to your stakeholders, board members, administrative officials, you will have access to that in the next couple of days. I'll also share out the slides and any of the other resources that have been shared today. So just keep an eye out for an email with that information, letting you know that's available. Again, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you to TimeLooper for sponsoring this content. And thank you again to Andrew and Yeet for a wonderful presentation. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day and stay well.
Thank you.